So, warm hello from Redwood City, and happy to be here. And as we begin, the theme of this week is compassion. And compassion is one of the great ideals that people try to live up to. But sometimes it's more useful to focus on not the ideal, but what gets in the way of the ideal. And there's a number of reasons for this. One is that if we try to live the ideal while there's something blocking it, then mostly the ideal is the idea of the ideal. It's kind of a little bit surfacey or not really deeply rooted inside of us. And also because if we're operating, we don't really understand what's blocking an ideal, but we're still acting it out. We don't really understand ourselves very well, and we can do all kinds of mischief if we don't understand what's going on inside of us. And finally, while the ideal, any ideal, might be seen as being great, it's not always the best response. And so if we can remove what blocks, what gets in the way of the ideal inside of us, then we might discover that without that blockage, there's actually something else, some other wholesome movement that wants to come out, something else that seems appropriate. And so compassion has a lot to do with how we are in the presence of suffering, our own suffering and the suffering of others. And one of the things that blocks karuna, this compassion that Buddhism focuses on, is if there's resistance to suffering, resistance to experiencing and feeling it, or contraction or closing down in relationship to it. And so in mindfulness practice, we want to be very aware of how we resist, how we close down, contract, or get involved in attacking, pushing away our own suffering, or any suffering that we are aware of. And so what is it like to experience your suffering, however small it might be, without any resistance, but also without any solid place inside, hard place inside that receives it, picks it up. Because what resists suffering is can often be ways in which we hold on to other ideals, or ideas about who we are, or how we should be, or our memories, our past. And suffering is difficult for sure, but mindfulness practice is a practice of learning to be wise and with suffering and learning over time. It's very important to understand it's over time, so we can be caring and careful with our suffering. But over time, to learn how to have no resistance to it, and in that way, to not be struggling with it, not be defensive to it, and not be the victim of it. But certainly we feel it. But in a sense, it doesn't limit us. It doesn't diminish us. It's like we're a wide open field, wide open space, in which suffering has space and room to be there as well. But we're not troubled by it so much. So as we sit this sitting, from time to time you might find that there is some suffering, some dukkha, something which is stressful or difficult for you that happens. And you might spend some time exploring the resistance you might have to it, or the blockage, or the contraction, and what it might be like to open and have no resistance, and find some degree of spaciousness and freedom with the presence of suffering. So taking a comfortable, upright meditation posture, and upright being metaphorical, sitting in the way that's right for you, but with your heart and mind upright, present. Gently close your eyes. And as you're sitting here now, is there already some resistance to something? Is there some blockage, some holding back, a sense of bracing yourself or pulling back? And if there is, that itself is the suffering. Can you be aware of the resistance without resistance? Can you be aware of contraction or pulling back without pulling back from that? And then maybe quite gently taking a slow, long, deep in-breath. And gently, slowly, long exhale. Breathing in deeply. And then letting go with the exhale. Breathing in slow and deep and full. As something which is gentling or tender, kind, moving through your body. Slow, long exhale. As a kind exhale, a soft movement, a caring movement within the torso. And then letting your breathing return to normal. And as you exhale, softening the muscles of the face. The muscles do not need to be held close to the skull. They can ease away. Relaxing the shoulders. The shoulders do not need to be pulled up towards the ears. The shoulders can relax down towards the ground. Relaxing in the heart area. In the chest. And maybe even the back rib cage can soften. And then relaxing the belly. breathing naturally, normally. For a little bit, attend to the rhythm of your breathing, to the cycle of breathing in and breathing out, and how it's experienced in the body, the physical sensations. And as you're sitting here, is there any form of emotional discomfort, any form of suffering or stress that you might feel, or any physical pain, discomfort? And if so, how are you relating to it? How are you with it? Is there any resistance? Or is there an openness, even a willingness to let it be there? Not so you can suffer better, but so that you don't make it worse with resistance and contraction. If you do feel anything that could be dukkha, suffering, see if you can breathe through it, or if there's resistance, breathe through the resistance. Don't struggle with the resistance, don't resist resistance, but hold it in awareness, breathe in awareness with it, as if becoming aware of it carefully is the only thing you need to do. Know it intimately. And if your discomfort, your dukkha is not too strong, experiment with opening up to receive it. In the way that you would receive a refreshing breeze of wind on a warm day, just open. Or the way that the air receives the wind. The way that a dry ground receives a raindrop. The way your pillow receives your head. Experimented with letting go of resistance and just being with it, as if your dukkha has permission to be there and that you will receive it. And if that's not possible, then be aware of the resistance. Breathe with it, feel it. as you exhale, also let go of your thinking. The more you think, the less it's possible to be receptive and open to dukkha. And if you're able to not resist suffering, to really allow yourself to feel it freely and openly, perhaps it touches something wholesome within you. Perhaps it can allow for something inside of you to expand instead of contract. Something inside of you to open instead of closing. Allow something inside of you to become more tender, soft and sweet, instead of hard and challenged and maybe even bitter. The point is not to be without resistance for its own sake, but to be without resistance to suffering, so the suffering can touch something much more deep inside, something wise and caring, a place maybe of tenderness or softness, some place that feels intimate and valuable. And then as we come to the end of this sitting, to turn your heart towards the world around you, perhaps to the suffering, both the small and the immense suffering in our world. And what would it, what is it like to open up to it without any resistance? As if there's a deep place inside, a place of wisdom, of care, of compassion, that's worth feeling, having it feel, be present for the suffering of the world without resistance. Almost as if you're a one-room house with two doors, one in the front and one in the back, and the suffering of the world clearly comes in, but it blows out the other end, the other door, back door. Not to dismiss it, but once you've received the message, it doesn't have to linger. The wind might keep coming, but there's no blockage for it. And then to end this sitting with actively thinking about, having thoughts of wishing, hoping, wanting the suffering of the world to decrease, to be alleviated, to come to an end. Thinking happily how wonderful that would be. Thinking about how wonderful the end of suffering would be. As if if others just knew that you had this wish, it would benefit them. Just knowing that there are good people who are care and concerned about suffering and the end of it is itself medicine for this world. And then maybe you can also consider how you might act on compassion today. Are there small acts of compassionate care that you can offer to those local and those far away? Compassion grows when we act on it. May all beings be free of suffering. May all beings be free of oppression. May all beings be free of hostility. May all beings be free of danger. May all beings be safe. And may all beings live in peace and freedom. May all beings be free. So I have one announcement. So tomorrow morning I'm going to have a cataract surgery for my eye. And I just learned yesterday that I'm supposed to be in a report in for the surgery much earlier than I ever anticipated. I have to be there at 6:15 in the morning. So I just learned this yesterday afternoon, so I haven't figured out what to do for our 7 o'clock sitting tomorrow. And one way or the other, something will happen here for you, for this. And one might be that there's a substitute who comes, most likely Diana Clark. Another possibility is that I can pre-record something today and post it tomorrow at 7 o'clock, or in some way. So one way or the other, something will be available. And I'll try to provide an update. If it's anything, if it's not the regular program here with a substitute, I'll post something on the calendar for this event tomorrow. If you read in the calendar entry, it'll explain what's going on. And also probably in What's New, the What's New section of IMC's website. It's on the bottom homepage on the bottom right. I'll put a little notice there about what's happening tomorrow. And the topic for tomorrow is the actual meditation practice on compassion, karuna, one of the actual Brahmavihara practice of karuna. And so it's a little bit, we're building up to this practice for tomorrow. So one way or the other, it'll be here for you. And I plan to be here Friday morning, and so look forward to being here with you then. So these days that I'm giving talks about compassion, I feel a little cautious or want to be careful here in talking about it, because I don't want to assume that compassion is only one thing, and that whatever way I talk about it, that's the true compassion or the right compassion. I think because compassion is such an integral part to many people's lives, it is something that's very important and sometimes lays at the center of, what's most valuable for them. I think each person will experience it very personally and in their own way. And so we certainly want to be careful. And one way to do that is to appreciate that maybe compassion, whatever it might be for you or for anybody, maybe it's not a singular thing, but rather it's a kind of a compound thing. It's made up from different aspects of it. And it's possible maybe to tease apart and look at some of the particularly important component parts of compassion. And maybe that helps us to look at it more carefully and find our own way with this important topic. And so one of the elements of compassion, I believe, is that it involves contact with suffering. And that can be, the word suffering sometimes in English seems like it's a really big word, only big things count as suffering. But in Buddhism, dukkha can also be very small forms of discomfort or stress that we might feel. And so compassion has something to do with being in the presence of suffering. And that's one of the component parts. That's for some people, that's an important part of it. And I say sometimes because there might be an exception to this, as you'll see as we go along. And so to be willing to be wise about how we are in the presence of suffering, our own and other people's suffering. And one of the component parts of, I think, compassion, at least the karuna that comes out of Buddhist meditation practice, is having no resistance to suffering. It doesn't mean we don't have a strong protest to the suffering of the world, or a strong idea that this shouldn't be there, or things have to happen. But in the heart, in our inner life, that there's no resistance to experiencing and feeling that suffering. And this is what happens as a consequence of meditation practice. That we learn in meditation practice that the contraction of resistance, the hardness of it, the closedness of it, is itself a form of suffering. And that it's kind of unfortunate to do it, and we want to be able to relax it and let go of it. And to be able to let go of the different ways that we cling, and just to be present in an open way for the suffering. It's one of the great gifts. And this is one of the things that I learned in my first early years of Buddhist practice, when I had a lot of suffering. The meditation practice was a lot about just sitting in the middle of it, and just allowing it to be there, but just being open to it and not being reactive to it in any kind of way or caught in any kind of way, just present. It was kind of an unconditional acceptance of the present moment with the suffering. And that was transformational for me. It was hard, but it was kind of like the meditation practice was a tenderizer for hard meat, and my heart just softened and softened by just this showing up to suffer without reacting to it or closing down to it. And it might seem counterintuitive to do this because it hurts, it's kind of painful. But it allows something to soften and open. And the idea of having the suffering we experience be something that touches us, and rather than contracting us or closing us down or making us hard, it actually expands something inside of us. Something becomes more open, or something kind of suffuses us. So I often think of this as being tenderness, myself. Tenderness, softness are words that I like for this kind of inner feeling. But tenderness has no boundaries. It has no walls or sharp lines where the tender is. And to experience suffering and have this openness suffuse, pervade, without boundaries, this feeling of tenderness somewhere in the chest, somewhere inside, is a beautiful feeling, a wonderful feeling, even though the suffering kind of hurts at the same time. So to meet suffering without resistance, this is, if we meet it with resistance, then it's easy to be distressed, to be upset, dismayed, frightened, angry, all kinds of other things. But to learn the capacity to receive it without resistance. And again, the reference point for this is meditation practice, where you're not expected to act on the suffering, you're not expected to go help someone. You're expected to just learn how to sit and be really present. And in that kind of context, to discover in that process this place of freedom inside, this place of softness and tenderness that gets evoked in the context of suffering. It's a very strange idea for people who've never experienced it, because suffering is, feels awful, and why should I feel awful and bad? I've known people who've gotten angry when it's suggested they should sit in mindfulness and open to their pain or open to their suffering and really feel it and know it, because their whole life was about getting away from it and fixing it and doing something. So part of compassion is this this place that's touched inside, that when there's no resistance, kind of an opening, a tenderness. And then the second part of compassion that I think of is caring for whatever that suffering is, either for the suffering itself or caring for the person who's suffering or the being that's suffering. And the word care is a kind of a special word. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to act to help them alleviate their suffering, that you're responsible for their suffering. It means that in some contexts, it's enough just that we have the capacity as to just care. Oh, I care about your suffering. It's important for me, and that you're suffering. It's important for me because I care about you. I want to let you know that I care. I sympathize. I'm with you. I'm your companion, I'm your ally, I'm your support. I'm here with you in your suffering. And I've been the recipient of that from people where I really felt that in some ways they cared for me in my suffering. Um, and and I didn't feel like they were asking anything or doing anything or expecting anything from me. And it wasn't like they're actively involved in trying to fix or take away my suffering, but just knowing that they sympathize, that there was this wonderful care and warmth and love and recognition and appreciation of me as I had my suffering. It kind of helped things relax and soften and feeling the human warmth and connection to someone else. So part of suffering is not is just simply the caring for someone, the kindness, the openness, the sense of shared humanity, independent of wanting to do something to alleviate it. But another aspect of compassion is that motivation to do something about the suffering. And this is where we have to be a little bit careful because what kind of motivation? And I like to think of it when we're in the context of suffering, there's two Dharma motivations that can arise out of it. One is, in fact, wishing and wanting to help the person so they don't suffer anymore, hoping for them not to suffer, and offering something, offering help and support, and being a compassionate action. The other action, response to suffering, is when it doesn't make sense for us to act on the suffering, to help them out or to do something to change it or give a helping hand. The experience of suffering in the world and our own suffering can motivate us to practice more diligently, to be inspired to practice and really get to the bottom of our own suffering, really find a deep peace, find a deep place of non-resistance and wisdom and deeper compassion, to go on the path of practice. And this is a very important part for me because there's lots of suffering in the world that breaks my heart, but I'm not going to do anything about that particular kind of suffering, not directly, it's only limited what I can do. But so I put my energy into another direction. One way is I devote myself more to my practice. And now that I'm a teacher, I also devote myself more to teaching because I'm not necessarily helping somewhere else in the world, but I'll just put more inspired effort into making a difference where I can make a difference. And so to have the contact with suffering give birth to motivation of different kinds, I think sometimes is very respectful for our own hearts. There's something about acting and being motivated by something that moves us a lot that is actually keeps freeing the heart or developing the heart. Not acting sometimes is a kind of causing more suffering, causing more harm to ourselves. But and the bigger the suffering is that we experience, like in the world, the more important it is for us to respond and to act and to do something. But remember, it doesn't have to be we respond directly to that thing. It might be we do something different. So, for example, 9/11 had a big impact on me, and when it happened, I felt I have to change. I have to be a different person. But I have to be changed by this experience. How do I want to be changed by it? And so I decided to start to train people to become Buddhist chaplains. So I acted in the world. I felt like I had to do something different. And so I had created this program that still exists. It's been going on now for about getting close to 18 years or so. Training in Buddhist chaplaincy. So the idea is, what can we do and not be burdened by the idea we have to do something that's directly related to suffering if it doesn't make sense for us to be involved. So the tenderness that comes from non-resistance, the simple care and caringness that doesn't really involve doing anything, but it's a deep care. And the third is being motivated to do something and being wise about what direction we go do there. But again, the reference point is deep meditation practice. And to have these component parts come forward, they come out of us without any obligation. And we can feel in meditation that any sense of obligation is a resistance, or is a heaviness, or is a burden, is a closing down. It's not really healthy to do it out of a sense of duty. I'm obligated to be compassionate. You can't be obligated to be compassionate because by its very nature, it's something that's deeper than any obligation. You can't manufacture it and enact it out. It's something deeper. And so this, to not feel obligated to be compassionate, but to be motivated to be compassionate, to be motivated to develop our compassion, because something deep inside us wants us to be a different person, wants us to be someone who can respond to the world in effective and useful ways. So no obligation to be compassionate. And I think for some people this is a maybe difficult lesson and a very important one to learn, I feel at least, because then the compassion can be clearer, stronger, and come from a deep-rooted place inside that hopefully makes it more effective and more meaningful for the people who we encounter and for ourselves. So you might have different component parts of compassion, but because there's so many different kinds of compassion, different people experience it different ways, maybe just a principle that your compassion is made up of different parts can help you to look more deeply. What goes on with you when you have compassion? And that's something I think sometimes very helpful to write about or talk to friends about, to kind of really start teasing apart what goes on for you when you feel or act with compassion. So thank you very much, and I will see you in a couple of days.